Hello, I'm Kara Winger. This is a parity webinar about professional development for professional female athletes. Today our hostess is one of my dearest friends, Ariana Ince. She's a fellow javelin thrower, the 2019 U.S. national champion in the javelin and two-time World Championships team member so far. But she also happens to own her own ergonomics consulting business based in Houston, Texas, her native state. And I will let her take it from here to teach us how to work better for health.
Cool, thanks, Kara. I included an About Me slide. So sleeves are not ergonomic. Yes, Mindy, correct. They're restrictive, it's bad for your blood flow. We'll get into it later. So I'm assuming this is how I share a screen. Never done this before. We're gonna go to Keynote. We're gonna share it. I apologize ahead of time because Keynote doesn't do the whole screen. So here we go. I just labeled it Ergonomics 101 because I'm just gonna give you guys kind of like the 30,000 feet, kind of run you guys through it. We're not gonna dive into anything too deep. If you have specific questions about something you're working on, we can go over that, but otherwise it's kind of a high level look at everything. The alphabet soup after my name is really fun. What all of those are is, here's some about me, even though Kara just like went on talking about me. So I have a bachelor's in civil engineering and a master's of public health and occupational health and safety. I'm a certified professional ergonomist. There are less than 2,300 of us in the United States that have received a certification. Some people don't practice anymore. Some people aren't alive anymore, so there are very few of us. So if you meet another certified professional ergonomist, it's pretty rare. I'm an engineer in training. I don't have my PE because I'm lazy and haven't finished taking the final test. And I have my certified strength and conditioning specialist certification, honestly, because you get a discount at Athleta. And that was really my major motivation behind getting it. Please don't ask me to write your program. I'm not qualified situation. I have been the business owner of Emerge since 2018. I started working for them as an intern in 2014. I went from intern to specialist to vice president to owner in 5 years. I did not stage a coup. It just happened to work out that way. Also, I'm really good at what I do, so that was helpful. I also moonlight as a javelin thrower, and moonlight is a very good term because most of my practices while I'm working happen at night because there's just no time. There's just no time, guys. Okay, so why are you here? 1, to listen to my jokes, and 2, to hopefully learn these 4 things specifically about how posture relates to your performance. So I want to go over how posture outside of sport can affect both your mood and your actual athletic performance. So it's not just we're really good about paying attention to what our body is doing while we're practicing or like what positions we're in or anything like that, but what you do outside of sport, as much as we think that we practice all day and we're constantly working on it, we're really not. But our posture outside of sport also really affects what we do in sport as well, and just our overall well-being. I'm going to teach you guys at Parity how to set up your quote-unquote office. I realize that most people don't have offices or their offices are in disarray. This is a carpet. There's a lot going on. So I'm going to teach you how to work from home effectively. So even if you don't have an office, I'm going to give you the opportunity to kind of figure out what you need to do to work most effectively. We're also going to go over mobile devices, mostly phones, and the male-female technology gap. I already know that this part is maybe going to make Minji really mad, but it's really interesting, and I think it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. So the last part is just going to be what to look for when transitioning to the working world. So that's going to be more stuff like what to ask your employer and what to look for and what kind of stuff that you should be, if you're actually creating an office, what kind of stuff you should actually have. That part's going to be a little bit smaller because I know we're all convinced that we're going to be professional athletes as long as we can. So we're going to focus on what you can do now. Don't make those faces. I can still see you. So we're going to focus on what you can do now for the most part, but then at the very end, kind of as you transition, what you can look for in an employer and in an office setting. Okay, so posture and performance is our first section. So posture and mental health are very, very, very closely related. One of the most viewed TED Talks of all time is by Amy Cuddy, where she talks about essentially power posing, which may or may not have been talked about in the nailing the interview thing, but it's something where essentially before you walk into any interview or things like that, her talk was on doing these power poses to encourage confidence and create kind of just this really good well-being going into your interview, so you kind of exude that confidence. So it's real expansive postures. It's kind of Wonder Woman, hands on your hips, arms right straight up in the air, things like that, things that are very expansive and broad. So she originally designed this because very good guys. She designed this because she was a law professor at Harvard, or working, like she's a psychology professor at Harvard, but she works in some of the law departments, and she would watch her male students come in, and they're big and they're boisterous and they're just taking up a lot of space, and they would answer all of her questions. And a lot of her female students would come in and they're kind of shoulders rolled forward, heads down, just kind of cowered a little bit and not really responding to questions as well. And so she was trying to create this way to show that if you just kind of use these more expansive postures, and she actually did some tests on hormonal levels, that these expansive postures, even for small amounts of time, can actually decrease your cortisol and increase your testosterone. So she just did little snapshots of it. But what she was really trying to prove is that posture and emotion are a two-way street. So the classic example of putting a pencil in your mouth is it forces you to smile. And they find that when you make people smile, their overall mood gets better, whether they want to or not. So it's one of those things where if you spend a lot of time in these expansive postures, even if you don't feel strong and bold and all that sort of stuff, if you do that, it will make you feel that way. And like, if you spend a lot of time cowered and bent over, or as she'll find out later, looking at your phone, which is a very similar posture, you're going to start to feel anxious and anxiety and all those sorts of things. So it all comes together. It's not just, oh, I feel sad, so I'm going to do this. You can make yourself feel anxious by having this posture. So it goes both ways. So these are examples of like high power body language. So big expansive postures on that top row. Everybody looks like they are just in charge of absolutely everything. My favorite is the woman on the far right, where she's clearly telling someone that they absolutely will not, they're going to get the business. They will not do anything that she doesn't want them to do. Meanwhile, on the bottom, you've got people that are very unsure of themselves, and those have that similar effect. Like, it increases cortisol and reduces testosterone. And in her study, there have been some questions about the p-values and all sorts of stuff, but she did it for such small snapshots of time that if we extrapolate that data, which I have taken the liberty of doing myself as an ergonomist because it's useful for me, then if you extrapolate that over 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, maybe 50 weeks a year, I don't know what your vacation schedule is like, but if you extrapolate that, it really starts to add up. So then there's posture and physical health, right? So lumbar lordosis is something that you see in the office all the time, absolutely all the time, because the issue is with any prolonged posture, especially in an office setting, or if you're on a long drive or things like that, your body is not your body, anyone here, the royal you. Your body is very lazy. It wants to adapt to whatever position you constantly put it in. We get those muscular adaptations in the sport that we do. Like tennis players will have one forearm that's way bigger than the other and all sorts of adaptations like that. If you sit down all the time, your body is going to be ready to sit down at all times. That's what lumbar lordosis is your body's like, I know we're going to sit down again, so I'm not going to waste all of this energy to straighten back up. I'm just going to be ready to sit. I'm ready to sit. You just give me a chair and I'm there. I'm all over it. So that's essentially what that is. So a lot of these bad postures are because we do these things over and over and over again. And that's where the issue comes in. The other issue is that some of the bad posture, like we've talked about, or I've talked about, I use we a lot because merge is just me, but I like to act like it's more than me. So we we is me. So when the shoulders are rolled forward, when we're on our phones like this, that affects how our diaphragm operates. So we can't breathe or do what we need to do nearly as well if we've got our shoulders rolled forward and we can't breathe. So the issue with that is, with that lazy body concept, if we keep doing that all the time, even when we're sleeping, we're not breathing as effectively as we need to, and that makes our recovery even worse. So we're not getting the deep restful sleep that we need to because we can't breathe. It's essentially trying to create sleep apnea by not getting enough oxygen while you're asleep. So as much as like we try to do things right, we can be hindering ourselves and decreasing our efficiency. I love that everyone's like changing their posture as I'm talking through this. This always happens. If we're decreasing our respiratory efficiency, we're basically just running in place. We're not actually helping ourselves with anything. So in my 6 years of work, the one thing that everyone is willing to take the blame for is their posture. The number of times I've heard people say, I just have bad posture. No one ever says, my diet is just really bad, that's why I'm overweight. No one ever says, I refuse to exercise, that's why I'm not feeling very well. No one ever says, yeah, I'm just really bad at time management, that's why I don't have time to do anything. The one thing that everyone is willing to take the blame for is their posture. And the irony of that is one of the things that is the least their fault. So posture is very much driven by your physical environment and also your emotional environment as well. So if you're constantly having someone in your life that's just rude and not basically building you up in any way, that's going to start to show up in your physical posture as well. If your chair is too small, or like you're having to like work on this tiny little laptop and you have to work like this all day long, your posture is because of what you're having to do all day. If you go back to that lazy body concept, your body is prepping for that position. So if the position is putting you in a bad posture, that's not necessarily your fault. You need to change your physical environment. Because if you set the environment up so that you have to have these big expansive postures, you're going to all of a sudden have good posture because you constantly have to do that all day long. So it's one of those things where we do it in sport, like we end up with these weird imbalances, and they're fine because that's what we do all the time and we need that. But in an office setting, if we're constantly doing something that isn't putting us in a proper posture, it's going to give us quote unquote bad posture. So it's known as swimmer's posture. I wanted to put a picture of Michael Phelps on here, but I was trying to make it mostly women. So there's a picture of him getting ready to like get on the blocks to dive in. And I think it's still called a block. I don't actually know. And his shoulders are rolled forward and his head is so far forward that it looks like his nose has to be in front of his toes. Like, it's unbelievable. And that's this constant swimmer's posture because they've overdeveloped the muscles on the front. And if you don't stretch them out, it starts to pull forward and your head comes forward too. So you can develop these imbalances in sport and out of sport, but out of sport is actually where you probably spend most of your time. So all of that stuff, you've maybe now understood why I care so much about posture. There's a lot going on. It affects a lot of things in your life. It's very important. So what can I do in my office setting to set things up? So this is the ideal ergo posture. I know the woman on the left is making a really weird arm gesture. It's the best way. It's the best way to check to see how far away your monitor should be. It's actually the best way. It's just unfortunate. It's fine. There it is. I've explained it. So it's elephant in the room has been discussed. Okay, cool. So this is the quote unquote ideal ergo posture. This is whenever I would walk around client offices, like big corporations, and I would walk through, these are the positions that people would try to immediately jump into because they would call me the ergo enforcer, the posture police, that lady that yells at us, all those sorts of things. So everyone tries to jump into these postures, and that is quote unquote the ideal posture. And there are a couple things I want to point out before I get out of this, is that your hips and knees in your chair should be about in a line. The desk, whatever desk you're working on, you want to have it about right at elbow height so that you're not having to reach up or bring your arms up or abduct your arms out. The monitor needs to be about arm's length away, even if that's an unfortunate way to try and check. And the top of the screen should be about eye level. So most people, especially if you're working on a laptop, you're not going to get any of this right. I'm just letting you know. We're going to get to that in a second. If you have the opportunity to stand up, it's very, very similar. So a lot of this adjustability, even if you're in a big corporate setting, isn't always going to be what you're able to do. So even in large office environments, depending upon the furniture that they've bought, depending upon the adjustability or things like that, it may still be really difficult to achieve, quote unquote, that perfect ergonomic posture. Even if you can get that though, I don't want you to sit like that all day. Even that can be harmful over long periods. So like if you think, and this is maybe an extreme example, but if you think about like people at the hospital, in their hospital bed, like they've got them leaned back, they've got them at a good angle, everything's nice and flat. If they're there for too long, like they have to come in and actually physically move them, because you can't be like, it's not just bed sores, it's you have to be physically moved as much as possible. Your body doesn't like not moving. And I'm just gonna bring this up. It's as athletes, it's probably not something we should worry about, but it is, as women, it's something that we worry about. There's an enzyme in your bloodstream called lipoprotein lipase. Basically, its entire job is it kind of hangs out in your arteries and blood vessels, and any fat that comes by, it grabs it and basically breaks it down to be gotten rid of. If you sit down, basically, and compromise the lower half of your circulatory system, 90 to 95% of those enzymes just go to sleep. So they're not doing their job. So it's one of those things where you have to get up and move around. It doesn't have to be all the time, but some. Like you just need to get up and move. That's all you have to do to activate that enzyme, is literally just stand up. So if everyone wants to stand up right now, I'm standing up already. Go for it. So it's one of those things where it's such a simple thing, but we just get so used to sitting because we've quote unquote made ourselves comfortable in ergonomics. So it's still about movement. And that's the whole key. So even in that quote unquote perfect ergonomic posture, the whole point of that posture is that what it allows you to do is it allows you a greater range of motion in all directions. So if you're sitting at an extreme range of motion because something doesn't quite fit you, your ability to move around within that is very limited. So as much as that slide before was like very prim and proper in Catholic school, that's not what you should look like all the time. You should have a variety of postures, but that should be your quote unquote home base so that you can move around within it. Again, I'm still talking about people that are maybe able to have ergonomic equipment or able to have an office or able to have these things. And in 2020, so many people are working from home that that's not really an option. So instead we have laptop ergonomics. So with laptops, they're actually designed just to be portable. They're not designed to be worked on for long periods of time, but we've all transitioned to using laptops all the time. The problem with laptops is that because they're so portable, the screen and the keyboard are right next to each other, which means you either line up the keyboard appropriately for your elbows and your forearms, or you line up the screen for your eyes and it's too far away for your arms or too high. So you can't really find the right spot. Plus, all it has is this little trackpad. You're not a DJ, you have a real job. I'm assuming that no one's a DJ. Quit using this little trackpad in the middle. It's not good for you. You get some internal shoulder rotation with your right arm. You're doing this weird thing with your wrist. Laptops are great for being portable and using sometimes. They are not great for using all the time as your primary device. there are lots of long-term issues here. So like in these photos, one of which is our good friend Kara Winger, who didn't know this photo was being taken, and I believe she was working for Parity. So this is an so this is a workplace issue that she was having. So sometimes if you're in rural Wyoming, there isn't a really good place to sit down and use your equipment. So you end up in these weird positions. So there's a lot going on. Like she's in a lot of flexion with her torso, like she's leaning forward, her head is just jutted out. And as much as I want to give her a hard time, if you look at that really brightly colored thing next to her, she's doing the next best possible thing, which is using an external mouse. So that is, there it is. It's a little owl. It's way too small for her, but that's fine. We've talked about it. So the easiest thing you can do is to use an external mouse, because what we're trying, the easiest thing, you can get a mouse that's wireless, that's small and compact and travel, like you're easy to travel with for $10. Very easy, like it'll save you a ton of time. So what it does is it allows you to open up those shoulders, and it gets rid of some of that internal rotation of that shoulder especially. It allows you to kind of sit back from it a little bit, because most people use the mouse more than they use the keyboard. So it allows you to kind of sit back, and then you can reach forward and kind of move back and forth between postures. It'll reduce some of that wrist contact stress you may have found from hanging out on the edge of your laptop while you're trying to use that trackpad. It's the very simplest, easiest thing that you can possibly do to try and fix just using a laptop. But here's a better fix. Put your laptop up on something and get an external keyboard. So now we're getting a lot closer. So maybe you're working on the kitchen table, or you're working wherever you are. You can get that laptop up to eye level, so that now we're getting rid of this posture where our head is down. So now you can kind of keep everything up a little bit better, and then use everything right in front of you. So this is going to help reduce some of that neck flexion, and it's usually a better keyboard than what you've got. I've got a Mac. I love the keyboard. It's very light touch. I'm obsessed with it. However, because I have to reach around that trackpad to use it, it changes how you type, as opposed to a standard keyboard where you can keep everything in front of you. There are also all sorts of fun, like split keyboards, and they've made ones now where you don't even have to have an actual keyboard. There are these things that just attach to your fingers, and you can just type like this, and it'll type for you. It's still very much in the beta stages, but it's pretty cool. So you don't even really need a flat surface. You could just do this and look really weird while you're doing it. Pretty weird. Cool. But the best fix is to actually get a home office. You get some external monitors. They're big enough. You can put them out. You can do this weird posture like we've already discussed. And you can do an adjustable height desk. The whole point of having an adjustable height desk is, one, yeah, you could stand up. But the biggest thing is that when you're sitting down, you can actually get it where it needs to be. Most desks are too high for pretty much anyone that's sitting down. Almost, even the cheap ones, especially the cheap ones, are way too short, or way too tall, sorry. Way too tall for most people. Some of that's gonna get into that male-female disparities in design, but this is gonna be your best fix. Like if you have any kind of budget and you're working 6 hours, 20 hours, more than 20 hours a week on something, this is really what you need to be doing. I understand that it's cost prohibitive in some cases, or space prohibitive in some cases, but there's almost always something that can work with whatever you've got. So I realize some of that, you're like, well, where am I gonna get this laptop riser? You probably got some books. You can just keep moving around. Like you can use an ironing board, like get creative with what you have. And like we talked about, all we're trying to do is give you a good home base. I want you to move around. So like now Kara, instead of like being super lean forward, is actually leaned back. And as much as that doesn't maybe look anything like that quote unquote ideal ergo posture that we talked about before, it's a different posture that completely changes the stuff that was overextended before. So now she is able to kind of give those muscles that were overstretched a break, while also kind of switching up those different postures and just changing what she's doing. And that's the whole point, is that just get creative, use your resources. Don't feel like you have to sit in those postures I just talked about. And again, those are just, that's ideal. That would be what if you were working 8-10 hours a day, 40 hours a week, 60 hours a week, whatever, that's how I'd want to set you up, because you're going to spend a lot of time there. But if you're working a couple hours here, a couple hours there, as long as you're moving around, it's not a big deal. So as much as like when Kara was doing a lot of the promos, like she was showing herself in a bunch of different positions, that was perfect. Like even if those positions were weird and strange, even a high risk position for a very limited amount of time is safer than even like a mild to medium risk position for a long time. So as long as you're moving around, and that's where I think people get stuck on ergonomics. They're like, oh, I have to sit just like this, or she's going to come around and hit me with a ruler. No, it's about movement, but it's about creating that home base so that you can actually do that and making sure that stuff fits you appropriately. So speaking of making stuff fit appropriately, we're going to do mobile device ergonomics, and this may be a frustrating part, but I also promise that it will be very funny. So here you go. So the technology and male-female disparity. As female athletes, some of us tend to be bigger than the average population, so we don't see this to be as much of an issue when we enter the workplace. So we have that as an advantage. So the average male is 5'10", apparently. And at 5'10", that makes him taller than 99% of women. So the average man, for most measurements, this is hand breadth, hand length, thumb length, all sorts of stuff like that, makes him larger than 99% of women. Unfortunately, crash test dummies, a lot of technology as it is, a lot of office spaces are designed for the average man. So the problem with that is then that it doesn't fit most women. Again, like some of us are very fortunate in that we are bigger than the average man. Also, side note about this curve, I'm pretty sure that this data is wrong, because I have never met a man who's 5'11" in my entire life. Like that should just be a gap. They're either 5'10" or 6 foot. There's no in between. So I just personal data. I'm not totally sure that the National Health Report is correct in this scenario, but I get that they had to draw a continuous line. Anyways, so thinking about that, I'm gonna give you a preface for the next chart, because it is my favorite chart, and it is a very good indication of the differences in specifically hand sizes between men and women. It is the best chart I have found on the internet. I found it back in 2017 when I was working on a different project for a corporate client, and I tried to edit out some parts of it, but I just gave it to you in all of its glory with the text on the side. So basically, this chart overlays men's and women's hands together to show you the differences between the two of them. This chart was created, if you can read that, this chart was created because a man was concerned about how small women's hands looked in porn holding specific objects. So he was trying to create a chart that displayed how women's hands were smaller than men's hands, and to reassure his fellow man that everything was fine. He also put a side note in that he is convinced that the average female porn star has a below average sized hand. But it's my favorite chart because it's actually the most informative that I've ever found. So sometimes things get created in ways that you don't want them to be created, but they're very useful. So I apologize for the origin of this chart, but I don't apologize for how informative it is. So there you go. This is a really good indication to show just how much difference in size, even just, it seems like there's a little bit of a difference between what a man's extra large hand and a woman's extra large hand is. That's a decent amount of reach, especially if you look at the thumb. So the thumb is what we're looking at specifically because the thumb is what we use the most when we're on our phones. So what does that mean? So when you're using your phone, it depends on the size of the phone that you're using. And it depends on what percentile you fall in for the length of your thumb and hand breadth. So I want to be very clear about the units on this. I know there's only an M, but it should be millimeters. It's not 62 meters. So 62 millimeters is the average woman's thumb. So again, they've basically done 5th percentile male, 50th, 95th percentile male for the thumb length. So that area on your phone that you're able to use comfortably without having to extend or reach or do anything weird with your hand is very small depending upon the size of your phone. So you've got reach with your thumb that you're trying to use. You've got grip on the phone if you don't have anything on the back of it. And the amount of the phone that you're actually able to use is very, very, very minimal because the phone wasn't made for you. It wasn't made for you and it wasn't made for me. I don't know who it was made for, but it also just depends on how you use it. So you've got all of these issues to deal with. And then as the phones get bigger, it's harder to hold them. They don't fit in your pants pocket because that's another thing that they weren't made for. I digress. So keep that in mind. Little side note, with your coronavirus slides or coronavirus and your phone, you may or may not have noticed that if you're out and about trying to use your phone, it is way more difficult because you've essentially put blinders on. Or in my case, you've just completely covered up your face because you're unsure about how safe you should actually be. So you're having to incorporate even more neck flexion, or you're having to raise your phone up to try and see your phones. So the woman on the top right, to her credit, is actually taking a photo, but it's a very good indication of how you should actually maybe consider using your phone with a mask, is that you want to keep your phone up as much as you can as opposed to trying to dip your head down. So just while we're still wearing masks and out and about, it looks great, Lauren. Everyone can see what you're texting. It's good. Yeah. So don't text anything you don't want any stranger to see. Just a heads up. And it doesn't have to be that high, but just in general, better than trying to dip your head down. So just while we're still out and about and wearing masks, just be more mindful of that in public spaces, or maybe just consider trying not to use your phone in public spaces for both cleanliness and your own personal health reasons. So there's that too. Okay, so these are things that you can do. So you've got like the pop socket, that sort of thing. All that does is it helps reduce that grip tension while also trying to use your thumb. Our thumbs are really just designed to move in one spot and then grip. They're not designed to move back and forth. That's not where all the muscles and tendons are. Like everything in your thumb is just designed to basically pinch, and that's it. So we have adapted to try and get them to move around, but that's not what they're made for. So if you can alternate between using your index finger, using two hands, just same thing with computer and laptop ergonomics, move around as much as you can with your hands, as opposed to just trying to do this with your thumb. Because a really good way to tell if you've overused this tendon in your thumb is to actually put it inside your fist, like so. I'm assuming you guys can all see me. Like so, and then roll it forward. So take it down and then roll it forward like this. If it's really tight through right here, or you feel a stretch, you've probably been overusing it. If you don't feel that, you're probably doing okay. If anyone has teenagers or anything like that, that's a really good way to make them go. My hands hurt because I've been painting, but that's a whole different thing. In general, if your text is longer than the maximum tweet, which is 280 characters, use voice to text or switch to an external keypad. That's just too much. Or call them. You can also just call somebody. It's just an option. Quick side note, if you ever feel numbness in your pinky and ring finger, that's ulnar nerve entrapment. So what that means, you have a question? I have to look at it. I don't know how to do that. You've messed me all up.
Saying yes, that's all. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Cool. So numbness in your ring finger and pinky finger. If you ever experience that, that's ulnar nerve entrapment, which usually means, I know, just these two, not these three. What that means is that you are spending too much time with your arm completely flexed. Lauren, like this, if you spend too much time like this, you may or may not have numbness in your fingers. But it's more people that use their phones in bed or when they're laying down is when you start to get that. So if you start to get that, set your phone down and take a 20-minute break. Just the last thing you want is that continued compression on your elbow and into your fingers, because nerves are not something that you want to mess with if you don't have to. So if you start to feel that, know that that's what it is, and that's how you can get rid of that, is just to kind of open those arms back up, take that break. It's probably a good sign you've been on your phone too long anyways. Just things to consider. I can't see any of the text, so I'm just rolling right along. These are just fun options as to how you can sit. Somebody named them, I don't know why. The take it all in is my favorite. Just their arms aren't even on the keyboard, they're just doing whatever. So as much as we talked about the ideal ergo posture, I still want you to move around. So like if you can do 9 of these in an hour and a half, that's great. You're probably gonna be just fine. But if you stay in any one of those for too long, it's not gonna be great. Very good cocoon, Kara. So just different options. Just know that it's about movement, not necessarily just your very static posture. So you can control your risk in a bunch of different ways. Just take consistent rest breaks. You can prevent eye strain by looking away from that tiny screen as much as possible. We're actually going to do a whole slide on just eye health because that's super important too. You can rest your arms. You can just take a break from it. Basically all of these just say use it a different way. Mix it up. Do something different. You can use a stylus if you want to. At one point when I was doing a lot of stuff on an iPad, I got a crayon stylus. So, I mean, like you can do all sorts of stuff. So it's actually a stylus, but it's just a crayon. So little things like that that you can do just make life a little bit easier for you. Same thing with this one. Just keep the iPhone centered and at eye level. Try not to dip it below chest level because that's when we start to dip down. Somewhere in between, right around the chest and your nose is going to be about right. Anything above here, now we're creating issues with our arms by trying to hold our arms up. So anything up is going to be better for you than down. The iPhone one, I pulled this from an old slide. Apparently I wasn't paying a lot of attention. So you can position your iPhone at right angles to windows. This is more applicable to computer screens, specifically to reduce glare on your actual screen. Tablets, same thing, keep it off of your lap. Try and keep everything up as much as you can, and just keep alternating hands. I know I'm repeating myself a lot about just keep doing different stuff, but that's what you need to do. So if you take anything away from this, just know that it's to keep moving. Okay, so eye health and screens. So there is a muscle in your little eyeball, or big eyeballs. I won't be discriminatory. In your eyeballs, there's this little muscle. And basically what it does is it pulls on the lens in a way that changes how you focus. So whenever you're looking at something very, very close, that muscle is contracted as much as it can. So that's why as we get older, it gets harder to see things that are further away because that muscle isn't able to contract nearly as well or as strongly. So that's called presbyopia, and that's basically when you lose that ability to contract that muscle fully. And as maybe you've realized your parents have done, they've started reading stuff further and further and further away. The problem is that if you think about staring at your phone or staring at a screen, and that muscle in your eye is basically doing an isometric exercise if you're not moving. So basically it would be the equivalent of flexing this arm for like 4 hours at a time and then going, my eyes are tired. I don't know why my eyes are tired. Well, you've been contracting that muscle for however long by looking at the exact same distance for a certain amount of time. And most people, when their eyes get tired, it's because they're looking at something close up. I have almost never heard anyone who's been looking out at the distance or some sort of beautiful scenery and gone, you know, my eyes hurt. I can't look at this anymore. It's too far away. I can't do it. So the problem is that if you don't change the distance that you're looking at, that muscle doesn't contract or relax. So that's why it's what we call the 20-20-20 rule. Every 20 minutes, look at something 20 feet away for 20 seconds. That's the equivalent of stretching out that muscle because you let it relax as opposed to keeping it contracted. There are a lot of questions from some people about blue light. The research on that is mixed as opposed to what it actually does to your eyes and what it actually does to you if you look at it for too long. You've got all the night shift stuff on your phones and on your screens. If you find that useful, absolutely use it. So you can kind of install those softwares to help, but it has been shown to disrupt sleep patterns. So that's the biggest reason to use it. The blue light blockers and things like that, the research is so mixed that I can't give you a recommendation one way or the other, but it's more about taking a break from the screen as opposed to just blocking the light and continuing to stare at that same distance the whole time. Okay, so if you're thinking of transitioning to working full-time, or you already work full-time, or you can work in an office, or you have an employer, things like that, what are some things to look for? So as athletes, transitioning to a sedentary 9-to-5 is much more difficult than people that have already kind of been sedentary for a while. I know that I have walked into people's offices and immediately been able to tell that they're an athlete because it's the person that's going, I'm uncomfortable, I don't know why, something's wrong, please help me, I know this isn't working, and they're just like doing all sorts of weird stuff because they're like, I know this is wrong because I'm smart and I understand how my body works, but I don't know why. So you're gonna have a hard time transitioning and trying to figure out what actually works for you, and you may more intuitively be able to set things up, partially because of this talk, but also partially just because we're really good at paying attention to our bodies. But more and more in companies, ergonomics programs or even just ergonomic equipment is something that they should be offering. So even in your interview, you may want to ask if they have an ergonomics program or if they'll allow for personal ergonomic equipment for you to bring in. Because yeah, you may get that super cool job that you want, but if it's in an old 1920s building with roll top desks and you're working on the equivalent of a typewriter, you're gonna be miserable. Like it's just, you have to make sure that you're comfortable at work because quite frankly, you're gonna spend more of your time there than you probably will sleeping. And that's really depressing, but it's the truth. If you're allowed to work remotely, fingers crossed that that's maybe more of a new normal. You can ask about equipment stipends and see if they'll help you set up stuff at home. If they will, cool. If not, it's not as expensive as you may think that it is. So there's a lot of ergonomic equipment out there. There's a lot of stuff that's, everything is labeled ergonomic now. I bought a spatula like a year ago that had an ergonomic handle. It's a normal handle. It's dumb. Everything has the word ergonomic in it. So don't let that sway you as to whether or not it's good. Reading reviews for ergonomic products, if you're debating buying something, is a complete waste of your time. I always use it as the equivalent of if you went on Amazon or wherever you go and there is a medium t-shirt and everyone that had ever tried on that medium t-shirt left a review for it, you're gonna have people that it was too big for. You're gonna have people that it was too small for. You're gonna have people where, well, it fit in the shoulders, but it didn't fit around the midsection, or it fit in the midsection, but it was too big in the like it's the way that things fit, like clothing is the same way that ergonomic equipment should fit, is that it's gonna be very personal to you and it's gonna be how it works for you. So just because so-and-so like has this really cool keyboard or really cool mouse doesn't mean that that's what's gonna work best for you. If you are considering buying equipment, the first thing you should always buy is a desk. Don't buy a chair, don't buy a monitor, don't buy a keyboard, don't buy any of that stuff first. If you've got a small budget, always try and buy an adjustable height desk first. Because what it allows you to do is if you can get the tabletop down to the height that you need when you're seated, you will actually alleviate the need for a lot of those other products because you're not having to get into weird positions to try and use things. You're also be able to stand up and activate that enzyme that we all talked about. Most people need a desk that goes down to at least 27 inches from the ground. So if it's higher than that, you're probably not going to be comfortable. So a lot of the cheaper desks only go down to 29 inches. Anthropometrically, that matches up with someone that's about 6 feet tall, assuming that you have a torso. If you're me and you're 6 feet tall, you can't use a desk at 29 inches because your legs are 70% of your body. That's maybe an over-exaggeration, but that's what it feels like personally. So most of those cheaper desks are too tall. But if you can get something, or even if you find something that's a standard height that fits you perfectly, that doesn't move, that's totally fine. Just make sure that it actually fits you. Those sit-stand converters that use, like, it's called Varidesk. You've probably seen it in like an airplane magazine or anything like that. If you have one, I'm sorry, it's garbage. The problem with it is, yeah, you can stand up, but what it's doing is it's reducing the amount of workable space that you actually have, because the keyboard and mouse have to fit on a very small platform. And the issue is that it adds about another inch, almost inch and a half to the desk that is already probably too high for you. So as much as you may want to stand up, what you've just done is created a worse situation for your seated posture. So there are different options that are maybe better, and now a lot of sit-stand desks are priced pretty comparably to those sit-stand converters. So just spend the extra $60 or whatever it is to get the full desk, and it will serve you so much better than just the converter. So if you do want to buy something, but you're not sure what, or you have questions or anything like that, consult a professional. I know of one. And Emerge currently has a best work from home equipment list. So like good, better, best in different price ranges for like, I'm under 5'4", like buy this desk. I'm under this will probably work for you. They're just general guidelines. If you're someone who's 5'4", but your wingspan is 5'9", you may need something a little bit different. Like it's just because everyone's built a little bit differently. Some of this stuff, it's hard if you can't try it. Make sure you just can get like a 90-day return or something like that. But keep your personal preferences in mind, and just remember that just because it works for someone else, it may not work for you, but that you are absolutely going to have what you need, and that's what's most important. I just realized how long I talked for. Thank goodness we're done. Cool.
That was wonderful. I learned so much in just 50 minutes. I learned so much about what I'm doing wrong and right. So thank you so much, Ariana. Anybody have any questions? I know we've got a few more minutes, but anybody that came in late have any questions?
Ari, what's
I
your
don't have
favorite?
any questions.
Oh, Michelle, go.
No, I was like, I don't have any questions, but I thought that was really cool. I would have never thought about all that information. And yes, my thumbs hurt, and when I stretch it, so that's why I was like, what? Let me try it. And it was like pretty cool to hear and to start thinking about. So thank you for this. I enjoyed it.
This was by far my favorite webinar, and I expected to enjoy it because obviously you're very good at what you do, but the way you related it to an athlete, like the second you said it impacts your performance, I was like, all right, I'm taking, you know what I mean? So yeah, thank you for this. This is great because I've been going into sports med every 2 days and being like, my hip flexor is my back, and like thinking I couldn't do a standing desk, and I stood up through the whole presentation and my body feels better. And that was like 20 minutes. So I'm just going to give you a shout out when I win a medal at the Olympics. I appreciate it.
Well, and what I'll say too is that like with standing, don't feel like you have to stand up all day. And it's just really, it's about, again, that variety of posture. So what I suggest to people that aren't used to standing and working, even though we are athletes and we know that we can do whatever we need to do whenever we need to do it, alternate 20 minutes at a time. So 20 minutes standing, 20 minutes sitting, 20 minutes standing, whatever. And maybe that last 20 minutes of that hour is just taking a break and going off and doing whatever you want. So yeah, bye. You just leave the last 20 minutes of every parity meeting. You're just like, sorry, your ergonomist told me to leave. So it's little things like that, just everything in moderation. Anything else? I'm just now seeing some of the comments, which I realize are comments now and not questions. So I don't know what they relate to, but there you go.
The chat was absolutely amazing. It was fantastic while you were talking. So thank you for everybody writing in the chat box. It was hilarious. And now I know more about that chart, and I'm mind blown. I think that was in the chat as well.
The chats were all relating to your awesomeness. That's all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Many things. All right, what's your superhero ergonomist story? Tell us one thing that you like changed someone's life.
Oh, my superhero ergonomist story was there was a man who was going to have to go in and get hip surgery. He went in and he basically just was trying to ask me like if there was any last things that he could do, because the surgeon recommended that he get this hip surgery because he was having this constant pain. And I went in and we just kind of had a conversation, and he said, well, okay, so it's not bad on Monday, and then it gets worse throughout the weekend. It's excruciating on Friday, and I can't even sit down, and then it gets better on the weekend. But then it's like, I come back on Monday and then it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and all this stuff. And he kept saying like, oh, it's like this one side, it's only this one hip. And he was right-handed, and like the hip that was hurting didn't make any sense for him being right-handed. And so what I finally said was, okay, try this, take your wallet out of your pocket. And so he pulled his wallet out of his pocket, and it was this big, because he apparently, when he was like first in his 20s and early 30s, he was very broke. He just always kept his wallet in his pocket. He didn't have anything in it. And then he went to law school and got a good job, and all of a sudden had like cards and business cards and all sorts of stuff in it. And it just got thicker and thicker and thicker over time. And he just kept keeping it in his pocket, but it was causing this disparity in how he was sitting. So all of his weight was on one hip, and that hip was under such constant load that it was causing him this excruciating pain. And the surgeons wanted to operate and cut him open and figure out what was wrong. So we basically said, take the wallet out of your pocket. Just me, I was the only one in there. So take the wallet out of your pocket and wait 2 weeks, like push the surgery back and see if that's what actually the issue is. And he ended up not having hip surgery just because all he did was take his wallet out of his pocket. But it's stuff like that, like, so much of it, once you hear it, you're like, oh, yeah, duh. Like, of course that makes sense. But ergonomics is one of those things where you don't know what you don't know. So until you kind of have someone just run over the basics with you, you're not even really sure. You're uncomfortable and you don't know why. But if you can have someone just point that out to you, it makes it that much easier. And it's been fun watching everyone kind of like change posture throughout this entire talk. Because everyone kind of, when we started, was doing one of these, like, ooh, another webinar. Here we go. What time is it on Friday? Can I drink yet? I don't know. But as we started talking about like breathing and power poses and confidence and all that sort of stuff, everyone kind of started to try and open up and sit up. Mindy took off her mask, like all sort, like everyone just like did what they wanted to do. And then I think that's when the chat started, as everyone was having a lot more fun, not just because I'm hysterical, but also because everyone's posture was up and open, and so everyone was feeling a little bit better too. So as much as I want to take all of the credit for it, part of it is that you guys started putting yourselves in positions to feel that way.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. If there aren't any other questions, it sounds like Ariana has given us permission to go to happy hour. So, you know, that's what time it is now. But thank you all so much. Next week, we are inviting Lauren Williams, and financial advising is going to be our topic. So if there aren't any other questions, thanks so much, Ariana. And let's go to happy hour at this point virtually, right?
That was great. Thank you.